Adolf Hitler had reason to fear for his life. There were people trying to kill him. Not only the armies of the Allied forces, but conspirators from within Nazi Germany. Even military men. A brave few tried to assassinate him. They almost succeeded. Now, a team of experts will reconstruct that fateful day. They'll analyze why the plot failed. And they'll prove, in a series of experiments, how very close the plotters came to killing Hitler. Today, this place is a tourist destination. But 60 years ago, this dense forest concealed Hitler's Eastern Command Center, the Wolfschanze, or Wolf's Lair.
Hitler liked very much to sleep very long. He had 9 o'clock a.m. his breakfast, and he had this breakfast alone. And then he made a little walk, and his dog, Blondie, accompanied him. And Adolf Hitler was teaching these dogs some little tricks and so on.
Rastenburg and the Görlitz Forest are now part of Poland. But in 1944, this was German East Prussia. Construction of the Wolf's Lair began in the winter of 1940-41, in anticipation of the German invasion of Russia. Although the Führer bunker in Berlin is better known, the fortified Wolf's Lair is where Hitler actually spent much of the war. His commanders were summoned here to brief and receive orders. He didn't imagine that one of them was an assassin.
Zahlreiche Divisionen der deutschen Wehrmacht mit Hunderttausenden von Kampferprobten.
July the 20th, 1944, 6 weeks after D-Day. Over 1 million Allied troops had massed in Normandy. British, Canadian, and American forces were beginning their advance towards Paris and the Low Countries. Soviet troops were moving rapidly westward. Millions of civilians were suffering and dying as war raged on both fronts. Allied bombs rained down on Germany, obliterating whole cities and their inhabitants. Hitler's spiteful V2 was being readied for deployment, and German buzz bombs continued to plague London. At Nazi concentration and death camps, the brutality and slaughter continued unabated. But as Hitler pushed on with his insane agenda, dissent was growing inside Germany, among some of the most powerful men in the military. On the afternoon of July the 20th, 1944, an officer in Hitler's inner circle tried to blow him up. Unfortunately for the world, the Führer survived and lived for another 9.5 months. And during that time, almost as many people perished on European soil as had during the previous 5 years of war. The plotters wanted to end the carnage. They planned to seize power and negotiate peace with the Allies. Something went horribly wrong in Hitler's crowded conference room that day. But what? The room, in a guest house not normally used for meetings, was destroyed. The explosion killed 4 men and injured 7 others. Seemingly, the plot was well planned. So why didn't it work? Unsolved History has assembled a team of experts to reconstruct the events of July the 20th, 1944, and to discover why the attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler failed. Dietmar Arnold, leading expert on German bunkers. Nikolai Lukov, an expert in digital 3D reconstruction. Rokas Mish, one of Hitler's personal bodyguards. And Dr. Robert Abernathy, an explosives expert. These men will reconstruct the violent events of a summer's day in 1944. They'll try to unravel the plot that, had it succeeded, surely would have changed the course of history. In a secret command center in German East Prussia, an attempt was made to assassinate Adolf Hitler in July of 1944. It failed. Had the Nazi dictator been killed, the Second World War might have ended nearly 10 months earlier. The man who planted the bomb was Wehrmacht Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg. A wounded war hero, von Stauffenberg had lost a hand and an eye the year before in a British strafing attack on his vehicle in North Africa. The 36-year-old colonel loathed Hitler. He thought the Nazis were destroying Germany.
He had lost his right hand, had only 3 fingers on his left hand, and had also lost his left eye. So the soldiers respected him. Plus he was an aristocrat, a count, and he was a high-ranking officer in the German general staff of the German Home Army, so no one would have believed for a minute that he was an assassin.
There had been a secret anti-Nazi resistance movement among certain German professionals and military men for some years. In 1944, Klaus von Stauffenberg became their leader. The dissidents carefully planned a coup d'etat. The conspirators would seize government buildings, military offices, and communication centers when they received word of Hitler's death. Colonel von Stauffenberg had direct access to the Führer. He decided to assassinate Hitler himself. His aide, Lieutenant Werner von Haifton, was in on the plot. The history books are clear about many details of that day. At 10:15 on July the 20th, 1944, the 2 officers landed at an airfield 5 kilometers south of the complex. They were met by an official car. Concealed in each man's briefcase was a bomb. Von Stauffenberg was to attend a briefing at the Wolf's Lair. This was the 3rd time in 10 days he had carried a bomb to a meeting with Hitler. The first 2 attempts had been aborted. Once there, the conspirators learned that the fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini, was expected to arrive by train that same afternoon. To accommodate Il Duce, the briefing had been moved earlier by half an hour to 12:30 p.m. The change of plan was unsettling, but not fatal to the plot. The next hitch was more of a problem. The meeting had been moved from the normal venue for such an event, a concrete bunker, to a nearby wooden guest house.
The 20th of July 1944 was a very hot day. Mosquitoes were in the air, a very uncomfortable situation. So they opened the windows. They protected the windows with special steel plates, and you could open to the outside because they wanted to have fresh air.
Shortly before the meeting began, von Stauffenberg announced that he wanted to change his shirt. Because of his war injuries, no one was suspicious when he said he needed his aide's help. In private, the men began to set the fuses for their bombs. But they were interrupted. The meeting with Hitler was about to begin. The conspirators were deprived of both the time and opportunity to activate the second bomb. A hasty decision was taken to place only 1 prepared charge in the briefcase. It was a terrible mistake.
But we don't know why they didn't simply pack the second package of explosive into the briefcase. It was presumably also have been detonated by the first package.
Von Haifton took the second bomb outside and waited there for von Stauffenberg.
After priming his bomb, von Stauffenberg walks the 400 yards to the briefing hut. The chemical fuse allows him maybe 15 minutes to place the bomb and get out of there. He manages to place the briefcase near to Hitler and then leaves the building, saying he was to make an urgent call.
Von Stauffenberg's briefcase and 24 men, including Adolf Hitler, remained inside the room. But an officer sensed something at his feet and moved the briefcase away from its strategic position under the center of the table to a far end behind a table leg. At 12:42 p.m., the bomb exploded. Von Stauffenberg observed the explosion from a distance of about 200 meters. Feeling certain that no one could have survived, he bluffed his way out of the military compound. But Hitler was very much alive. He had sustained only a sprained wrist, a punctured eardrum, and splinters in his legs. On the way back to the airport, the men disposed of the package containing the second bomb. The Gestapo later found the package. They recorded that it contained 975 grams of an explosive substance known as Plastit V. At 1:15 p.m., only an hour and a half after the explosion, von Stauffenberg and von Haifton boarded their flight back to Berlin. They had no idea that Adolf Hitler was still alive. But their state of ignorance would be short-lived. Retribution was swift. Less than 12 hours after the bomb exploded in the Wolf's Lair, von Stauffenberg, von Haifton, and 2 other conspirators were arrested and shot. Another kingpin committed suicide. Within days, 12 more of the plotters were rounded up, hastily convicted and hung by slow strangulation with piano wire. Hitler's rage knew no bounds. 5,000 Germans, most of them military men, were arrested and executed after the July plot. Every year in Berlin, at the World War II headquarters of the Wehrmacht High Command, a wreath-laying ceremony takes place, honoring the men who conspired to assassinate Hitler. Today, they are remembered as heroes. This is where von Stauffenberg and von Haifton were executed, at midnight on July the 20th, by a firing squad. Frau Johanna Ratkens is the widow of one of the executed conspirators.
Und dann ist nach 3 Wochen, wie weit er hatte natürlich Verhöre bei der Gestapo gehabt und ist dann und dort wurde er eben wegen Landes und zum einen zweiten Wisch, in dem alles beschlagnahmt wurde. Alles. Die Windel des gerade geborenen Babys. Und von den größeren Kindern sowieso alles und von meinem Mann und mir. Und das Bankkonto war schon gesperrt, also ich hätte gar nicht mehr.
The men were hung from meat hooks in public view, their dying moments filmed for Hitler's private viewing. The Gestapo conducted a thorough investigation of the crime scene and created a detailed report.
The immediate scene of the crime is the conference room in which the daily briefings took place. Room and all furniture severely damaged, wood and leather fragments were embedded in the boarding of the walls. Detonation hole shows that the explosive device detonated above floor level. The reconstructed parts of the right of the 3 table supports clearly show the direction of the explosive wave. The upper shock wave destroyed the briefing room and dissipated through the windows, doors, and partition walls.
The report makes it possible to reconstruct many details of the event, including the size of the room, the weight and composition of the bomb, and where exactly it was placed. But to fully understand how Hitler managed to cheat death on that July day, we need to go one step further. Unsolved history has returned to Hitler's Eastern Command Center. In the summer of 1944, the Wolf's Lair was one of the most secret and secure places on Earth.
Hitler once said that he would gladly sacrifice the lives of 2 could take out the Soviet military high command. And he expected that the Russians or the British would be just as willing to sacrifice crack troops to take him out. So he ordered that his new headquarters should be built in an area difficult for paratroops to land in. Rastenburg in East Prussia was a suitable site due to the problems that enemy paratroopers would face, landing in an area dominated by forests and lakes. The trees also providing natural camouflage.
The Germans supplemented the natural camouflage with clever concealments of their own devising.
On the edges of the roof they had put these steel loops so that they could put wires on it and have camouflage nets over the pathways so that the view from the air would have been obscured. Apart from the camouflage nets, very often we found this seaweed applied on the outside of the concrete in order to have a camouflage effect. And they had put a layer of tar on top of the buildings. And on that, another layer of tar paper, then a layer of earth. And in that, they just put plants or grass so that it was not possible to see these bunkers from the air. You couldn't distinguish them from the surrounding trees.
During the summer of 1944, a member of Hitler's SS bodyguard regiment was Sergeant Rochus Misch.
Als wir dahin kamen, nicht, da war das für uns alles neu. Wir haben es auch ganz schnell umgetauft. Das nannte sich Wolfschanze. Und da dort so viel Mücken gab, da haben wir das schnell umgetauft und nannten es, haben wir gleich ein Schild geschrieben, Mückenheim und nicht Wolfschanze. Also ein Doppelname, Mückenheim-Wolfschanze.
The East Prussian compound was divided into 3 concentric security zones. The highest security, in Sperrkreis I, was reserved for Hitler and his closest associates. After the war, more than 80,000 mines were discovered in this area. It took years to dispose of them. Not until 1955 was it safe to walk these paths. When the Russian army captured the compound in January of 1945, they found it in shambles. The retreating German army had seen to that, and in so doing had destroyed virtually all physical evidence of von Stauffenberg's bomb attack. When initially constructed, the secret complex consisted of a group of wooden buildings. But as the war progressed, brick, concrete and metal replaced much of the wood.
It's actually very hard to figure out how the buildings were oriented, because if I try to use my compass, the needle spins around as soon as I come near any metal, because all this concrete is so full of steel reinforcement that you hardly can tell where north is, and it keeps changing.
New bunkers were built, and existing ones strengthened throughout the war. Hitler felt particularly safe at the Wolf's Lair because it was beyond the reach of British and American bombers. Nonetheless, anti-air raid precautions were taken. The Führer even designed some of the Wolfschanze bunkers himself.
He felt himself like an artist, like an architect. So he was drawing plans of houses, of bridges, and of bunkers as well. And he made his own creation to make the bunkers really bomb-proofed.
Hitler's paranoia was limitless. He ordered bunkers to encase other bunkers. In this case, an inner concrete structure was fortified within an outer shell. The space in between the two was filled with gravel. The Führer's personal bunker was the most impregnable of all.
Adolf Hitler was living in his bunker called Hitler Bunker. If you watch the ceiling of his bunker, this means his sphere was 8 meters thick. And he had some rooms and very, very few personal things, some books. If you go to his room, you would see maps and documents. And he had a telephone. So he connected the war events in a very close link with his own person.
Some historians believe that von Stauffenberg anticipated that his meeting with Hitler would take place inside one of these concrete bunkers. Accordingly, he brought small bombs, knowing that the explosive force would be greatly amplified inside a reinforced concrete box. These theorists believe that when the briefing was relocated to the less fortified structure, von Stauffenberg's bomb simply wasn't up to the task. But other experts dispute that. They say that the would-be assassin knew exactly where the meeting was to be held. He'd been with Hitler at the Wolf's Lair on July the 15th, as this photograph shows. So 5 days before the appointed day, he would have learned that the bunker was off-limits, and why.
Aber jetzt beim Führer, der Bunker, der wurde ja verstärkt, enorm verstärkt. Und das war noch nicht ganz fertig im Bau. Man konnte da noch keine Berichte machen, das war viel zu heiß, der Beton und so weiter. Und da wurden die Lagerbesprechungen in einer Baracke.
What did the briefing hut look like in 1944? Nikolai Lukov needs to find out so he can model it in 3 dimensions on a computer.
You can see from here, he can show you.
So these are the windows that were open?
Here was the windows that were also open. This was the windows from the room. Inside of this, like a shoe, there was a construction
For the frame?
to hold the...
Or for the steel shutter?
For the steel shutter.
You can see exactly where the frames of the windows were, and that's actually quite helpful. But still, on the other hand, it's quite hard to figure out where that actually was and at what height.
Using the Gestapo report and wartime maps of the complex, the team starts to home in on where the briefing room once stood. If our experts get it right, they'll be able to move forward with their experiments and maybe prove conclusively why the assassination plot failed. A crack investigative team is mapping part of Hitler's secret command center in what was once German East Prussia. Here, in July 1944, an attempt to assassinate the Führer failed. The team planned to build a computer model of the place where it happened. Then a life-size model. Then blow the whole thing up. They find the collapsed concrete roof of the briefing hut, still there after 60 years. Their instruments detect that the top of the roof now lies at about the height of the map table's surface when the bomb went off. So although they are on top of the ruin, they actually stand in the middle of the briefing room. The table was here. Hitler stood here. Michael Feudrowitz demonstrates where the bomb was originally placed and where it was moved to.
And then Colonel von Stauffenberg came in with a bomb in a suitcase, and he put the suitcase exactly here. And then he left the room, and another Wehrmacht officer put the suitcase, because it was disturbing, and put it here, behind the solid wooden leg of the map table. And that's the reason why Hitler didn't lose his life.
And there's another reason he survived the blast. This one, ironic.
Hitler was looking at a map of the Eastern Front, and the ironical thing is, if the German Wehrmacht would be more advanced to the east, he would be on the right place where the bomb was placed.
Standing in that right place would have killed him. If Hitler's position relative to the bomb and the protection afforded by the table itself saved his life, it's important to figure out exactly what the table looked like. In analyzing an explosion, every detail is critical. The size of the charge, where the charge is placed, the shape of the room, whether the windows were open or closed. A set of rare photographs taken by Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, may hold the necessary clues. After the war, many of the Nazi documents, photographs, and film footage not destroyed by the Germans were confiscated by the Allies. Some have ended up in Washington, D.C. at the National Archives. Historian Daniel Martinez and researcher Martin Baldassari hope that somewhere in these thousands of photographs there might be glimpses of the briefing room.
Okay, what you can see here is the strips that show the damage.
Oh, you can see it.
After the bombing.
Yeah, this window is all busted down. You can see some of the curtains hanging outside the windows.
There are no images of the interior. However, there are such shots, but not in these albums.
Not in these albums, yeah. Here's a really nice one. 2 German officers standing. You can see behind them is a wreckage of what went on inside when that bomb exploded.
Unfortunately, the albums are incomplete.
Martin, I noticed there's holes cut into this album and it appears strips peeled away. Do you know how that might have occurred?
Aside from the heavy use of these albums, that could be one of the reasons why they have now restricted people to surrogates of these albums, because people probably ripped them off, cut them out.
Yeah, you can see
used a razor blade, because in this case you can see what's missing here, because someone on the other side
wanted something.
Took this frame.
Right.
The images that do survive will aid the computer recreation. The team can now begin to rebuild Hitler's briefing room. The Gestapo report supplies the dimensions. The research in Rastenburg confirms details of the building's construction. Photographs and contemporary accounts fill in the remaining details.
The photos that Marty Baldassari found in the National Archives confirm absolutely what we found on site at the Wolf's lab. We measured known parts. For example, since we've been in the Wolf's lair ourselves, we knew exactly that these windows from the ruins that are still there are 1 meter wide. Relating that with a few perspective tricks in the computer to this table and things like this hand, Goering's hand, probably a few percentages longer than my 20 centimeter long hands, we found out that this table was exactly 1 meter 20 wide and 6 meters long.
Another discovery adds crucial information. It is so simple that most historians had ignored its significance. The table was built in breakaway sections.
During our research, we found photographs of 4 long map tables used by Hitler. We think now that there were standardized table parts which could be combined to make tables of different lengths or support different loads. I mean, you can't get a table this big and bulky into a bunker. The corridors are too narrow, and you wouldn't be able to get the table around the corners. So the only possibility is to have a table made of prefabricated parts that can be moved individually and then put together inside the bunker, like a ship in a bottle.
Because the collapsible table had not previously been taken into account, it's likely that the explosive force of von Stauffenberg's bomb has never been accurately calculated. Michael Feudrowitz and Nikolai Lukov used the computer to reconstruct Hitler's position and the effects of this blast.
Well, that's exactly the situation, I mean. And you see Hitler leaning over the table, you know, his elbow on the surface and his chin resting in his hand. And it seems that this part of the table protected him a little bit.
Maybe even the explosion caused parts of the table to spin around his head.
And he was not touched by these flying things.
These 2 pieces of wood protected him from the rest of the explosion.
It appears Hitler's leaning position and the breakaway table could have been factors in his survival. All the details are in place for the last of the team's experiments. It's time to head to New Mexico for a series of explosions. Architect Dietmar Arnold has traveled from Germany to oversee the construction efforts.
What we're going to be building here today is the replica of this table. We're going to try to get this table to look as much as possible as what it was in the original.
As we can see here, looks good. The original construction looks a little bit nasty, but it's, I think, absolute no problem.
All the elements are in place for the final experiment, all except one: the bomb. Although the explosive substance used by the conspirators is no longer manufactured, the experts have something that will work.
This is C4, which is going to take the place of the hexogen, which von Stauffenberg was using at the time, which is no longer available. And today we're going to mold this into a charge, which we believe was approximately brick shaped. And then we'll be inserting the detonator into the priming hole. And then just simply insert this into the satchel.
Here we have had the bump, you know. Here there was some generals, and here we have the position of Hitler, you know. But what do you think if we haven't had the generals? He will die or not?
Well, all matter is going to absorb somewhat of the blast. The energy can be reflected off of surfaces or it can be absorbed by surfaces. Anything in between is going to be a barrier to him. The blast pressure can go around obstacles, but the fragments will obviously be absorbed by anything in between.
The blast wave will move through the room and back, bouncing off the walls.
But I'm really wonder if you see to the photographies how it's possible that people can alive inside of this room, you know, after this detonation.
Explosions create extreme air pressure, which can in itself be deadly.
We're going to measure the overpressure in the room with these two gauges. This one is to measure the pressure that is reflected or is sent over here from the bomb behind the table leg. And this gauge over here is looking at the bomb, and it is sensing the pressure that is coming directly from the bomb. There is nothing in between the two.
Mannequins, representing the military officers who attended the briefing, will reveal the effects of the explosion.
And this is a military replica of a human body, about the same height as an average 6-foot human. It's going to show some evidence of blast by fractures on it, but mostly the impacts of fragments where they'll be embedded.
So the Hitler mannequin is actually more lifelike. It's got a soft tissue surface so that we'll be able to see when the blast comes what splinters went where on the body.
Now, it's down to the bomb itself.
In the original, we have had around 970 gram of explosive materials. But I don't know the American from the size. We get the same result.
We looked at the chemical composition of the explosive that was actually used and looked at the equivalent energy from C4 and calculated that there's about 10% less energy available in the original explosive.
Well, we have 2.2 pounds, which is 1 kilogram equivalent, but we can easily go down and adjust that weight back to 2 pounds to the 10% off.
Brad Bowling makes corrections to the bomb.
Okay, Brad, I think now your job start. I give you the briefcase and now you must move the bomb.
Everyone is cleared from the site and moved to a bunker 200 meters away.
Are 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Before examining the effect on the mannequins, the air pressure recordings are analysed. These will suggest what kind of damage would have been inflicted on the victim's eardrums and internal organs.
This graph on the screen here is a pressure reading, which reads about 1.1 psi. That would blow your eardrums.
The air pressure reading indicates a force level that would easily have caused the hearing loss that Hitler sustained in his right ear on July the 20th, 1944. So far, the test blast replicates history.
As you can see, this is the crater. It's about what was predicted to be 8 to 9 inches deep. The table end is also thrown to the opposite end of the room. So it's pretty much just as the picture is of the The actual one is, that one has a little more damage than what our table did. As you can see, the tabletop acted as a shield. You can see the leg here also, that's right where the bomb was placed against it.
Are the other injuries that Hitler received borne out by the experiment?
But you can see the lower extremities of Hitler still was subjected to a great amount of secondary fragments off the bomb and the table.
And so his pants are shredded, but then above the waist, his shirt looks completely okay.
The damage to the mannequin mimics that sustained by the Führer in the real bomb blast, down to the injured wrist and shredded trouser leg.
In the actual fact, Hitler had punctured eardrum and a sprained wrist and then splinters in his legs. What we see here in the dummy is a lot of small but not life-threatening splinters in the legs. We see very little injury above the waist. And there's, in fact, an injury to the right arm just below the wrist, which is pretty amazing. And he would have died if a splinter had penetrated into his heart or into his lung or something. But the only splinters he took were in the lower body, and that's why he lived.
Ironically, the German officer who moved the bomb, saving Hitler's life, was himself killed by the explosion. The results of this experiment suggest that the reconstructions of the room, the table, and the bomb are extremely accurate. Now that we have duplicated the failed assassination attempt and understand why it failed, we are free to conduct a series of further speculative experiments. The first is a splinter test. What if the table had been made out of different wood?
The legs of the table were made out of 2-inch thick oak, and so we're using the identical thickness for that, for this test on the splinters. The top of the table was 1.5 inches thick, and it was made of pine, and we are using the identical wood to generate splinters from it.
If the table legs had been made out of pine instead of oak, would Hitler have been killed by the bomb?
We're set up. All we have to do is a system check and we're ready to go.
Okay, then we go.
Let's test it.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, you notice there's a big difference in the blast holes. This one we have a clear-cut hole compared to the oak is all splintered. But when you see the dummies, this one over here, you actually have scorching on the trousers. You have a lot more severe blast. His arm was removed. He's tilted back a lot more, but he is basically peppered with sawdust. It's all small particles, nothing big. On the other one, he would have had a lot of superficial damage. But again, from this range and this size, we didn't probably receive anything lethal. But you don't see the recoil on him. His hands are still essentially in the same place. His hat's still on. Not nearly the blast. He didn't receive the force.
Then that means that the material is more better.
Right. We know that oak is a lot better blast shield than pine for this test. This one cut the blast down a lot. This one didn't resist.
Fate was kind to Adolf Hitler that day, as it was when one of his officers moved the bomb away from where Hitler stood. But what if the briefcase had not been moved? Would the Führer have survived? July the 20th, 1944. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg deposited a briefcase near Hitler's feet during a meeting. It contained a bomb. Another officer moved it behind a table leg, unwittingly saving the Führer's life. The Unsolved History team want to find out what would have happened if the briefcase had remained in its original position.
We're going to be looking at a different situation altogether because we won't have that leg shielding all the people standing at the center of the table. The thing to do is build another bomb and try to see what happens if the bomb had not been moved.
The room must be rebuilt and fitted with a new table.
Let's all prepare for the next test. And now I place the bag directly on this plate. Here, Stauffenberg moves the bag first, and then we leave the bag on this place, and then we will see what's happened.
Yeah, we like the results of the first explosion, so we're going to use exactly the same weight and see what difference the damage is going to be.
Okay, let us start.
A new bomb is placed in the exact spot where von Stauffenberg left it.
All right, I'm charging. My systems are ready.
Okay, ready, James, Brad?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Fire in the hole.
In our first test, the air pressure reading was 1.1 psi, a level that would have resulted in Hitler's losing the hearing in one ear, but suffering no more significant injuries.
Zooming in on the pressure tracing right now. And what we're looking at here now is a gauge directly behind Hitler, which is about 154 pascals. So it's actually 22 psi.
At Hitler?
At Hitler, yes.
Oh, so that's a lot more than the previous blast.
The previous blast, yes,
Right.
which was about 49 pascals.
And the only difference was the table leg.
Had the bomb not been moved, the table leg would not have served as a shield. The explosive impact on Hitler would have increased by a factor of 3.
It's impossible.
It's different.
It's absolutely damaged.
Yeah, this whole half of the table is shattered.
And looks to Hitler. What's happened? Impossible. What you can say?
Yeah, he doesn't have any splinters at all. There's all blast here, no wood damage, but the blast was much more powerful. It just took his clothes completely off, ripped his arms off. He couldn't have survived this blast.
You know what I cannot believe? Only one piece of wood changed the history. It's absolute impossible.
Yeah.
I can say absolutely. I cannot believe.
Our second test confirms what many historians have theorized. Had the bomb not been moved, Adolf Hitler would have died. The team decide to go one step further. They want to revisit the third turn of events that proved fortunate for Hitler that day. After being interrupted, von Stauffenberg decided to place only the one fused charge in the briefcase. What would have happened if he had placed the other unfused charge alongside it? Would that one have detonated as well, thus doubling the explosive power of the blast?
The more sensitive explosives are, the more likely they are to sympathetic detonate. So in the case of C4, it's a very insensitive explosive, so if it's not touching, it won't propagate as easily, and there's a good chance it will just scatter around.
In the final experiment, 2 identical charges are placed in the briefcase, one with a detonator, the other without. We place the bombs in the location where the real bomb exploded.
3, 2, 1.
Both charges ignite, even though one has no detonator. Had von Stauffenberg put them both in the briefcase, the briefing room would have looked very similar to this one, completely destroyed.
There's no other dummies. There he is. The trousers are shredded again. Although we have a lot more damage to the legs this time.
Look to the leg here. You have a big piece of wood inside.
Oh, look at this one. Huge. Right in.
A really big one.
Look at the rib cage up there.
The survival chances of anyone in the room would have been very slim indeed.
It's not possible. I think with 2 kilo Hitler would die. Absolutely.
But Hitler lived, and many more millions died in the 9.5 months of war that ensued. Klaus von Stauffenberg had brought everything he needed to kill the Führer, but he chose not to put both bombs in his briefcase. We now know that several twists of fate worked against the conspirators. If the meeting had been held in a concrete bunker, the blast would have been far greater, killing Hitler. Although the bomb was placed close to Hitler's feet, it was moved seconds before detonation. Had it been left in place, the explosion would have demolished the room, killing Hitler. Finally, and perhaps most tragically, had both charges been put in the briefcase, both would have exploded, killing Adolf Hitler. The leaders of the July the 20th conspiracy and thousands of sympathetic Germans were executed or forced into suicide. Before he was shot, von Stauffenberg reportedly cried out, "Lang lebe frei Deutschland!" Long live free Germany.